Hello and welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. This podcast is brought to you through the generous support of the Albert and Ethel Hertzstein Charitable Foundation. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Today, our special guests are Dave Walker, communications specialist here at the museum.
Hey, guys.
Movie critic and Service on Celluloid veteran Mike Scott.
Not only am I happy to be here, but I'm happy to still be considered a special guest.
And Larry DeCures, curator here at the museum.
Hey, Seth. How you doing?
Just fine. Today we will be discussing the 1967 classic, The Dirty Dozen. A bit of a renegade officer named Reisman is assigned to select and train 12 hardened criminals in the U.S. Army for what amounts to a suicide mission. Reisman is to take these criminals and turn them into special operatives that will parachute behind German lines just before the D-Day landings in order to assassinate several high-ranking German officers who are known to be essentially partying at a French chateau. The film follows Reisman and his men as they train and navigate the Army's continued attempts to derail the plan and send the men back to prison. Reisman and his Dirty Dozen successfully pass through training and execute their mission. Dirty Dozen stars Lee Marvin as Major Reisman, Jim Brown as Jefferson, Donald Sutherland as Pinkley, Charles Bronson as Waterslaw, Telly Savalas as Maggot, Ernest Borgnine, John Cassavetes as Richard Jackal, who seems to be in every World War II movie ever made, George Kennedy, and Robert Ryan. Dirty Dozen was directed by Robert Aldrich, produced by Kenneth Hyman, and based on the book of the same name written by E.M. Nathanson. The film was a massive success both financially and critically. So we'll ask this question as we always do. And Larry, I will start with you, if you don't mind. How accurate is The Dirty Dozen?
It's not. It's fiction.
Thank you.
But some people believe that Force 10 from Navarone was real. So, but...
Wait a minute. It's not?
No, it is not.
Anyway, I think it's a pretty good depiction of what it must have been like to be in prison, perhaps, in the Army. I have nothing to go on that.
No experience in your Army career as being in prison?
No.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Never in the stockade. But, the fact of the matter is, you had about 1.2 million American servicemen in England for the buildup of the invasion of Europe. And the Army had about 100,000 former felons in it at the time. So it's not too hard to imagine that there would have been a whole lot of guys committing a lot of horrendous crimes in England.
No doubt. How about you, Mike? What do you think?
Well, I'll say this much, and you guys would know a little bit better about the specifics as far as the hardware and the patches and all that sort of thing. But the one thing that struck me, it's clearly wildly fictional. This is a 14-year-old's war fantasy. But one thing that struck me is somewhat authentic. It's kind of like with Kelly's Heroes, is that anti-authoritarian streak, which I'll bet spoke to a lot of service members, a lot of folks who served in the war, might have recognized a little hint of truth in that.
Quite possibly. What about you, Dave?
I sort of sense the same thing in that it may be accurate in the unit cohesion building process. I think the raid, the New York Times called the raid downright preposterous, the idea of the raid. But I'm not sure because I know that there was lots of behind-the-lines action in World War II preceding D-Day. So that's sort of why I'm here, is to find out from the historians and experts about how wacky this whole idea is.
Well, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, I know that Lee Marvin had problems as a Marine who served in the Pacific Theater. He had problems with some scenes, and so he served as sort of a technical advisor to make sure they got things right. For example, from what I understand, he really had a problem with the scene where he wrestles a bayonet away from Posey, the character played by Clint Walker. And when he protested, Robert Aldrich said, "Come on, this whole movie is preposterous. You got to go along with it." So even if the folks who were working on it recognized that, okay, we're inventing something here.
Right. There was no, at least in my knowledge, there were no, massive attempts by Allied forces to parachute people behind enemy lines to wipe out a chateau full of German officers. I don't think that ever happened. Pretty dang sure that never happened.
But plenty of commando raids, especially earlier in the war.
Absolutely.
Against strategic targets.
Absolutely. And we get to that in a minute. But as far as the premise of the movie, no, it's completely inaccurate. It's completely fictional, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. It is. So how accurate is the depiction of incarcerated soldiers, Larry? You kind of touched on that briefly here. Was death by hanging common?
Well, for I guess criminal offenses, yes, but for crimes like cowardice, you would face a firing squad. But I mean, that only happened one time in World War II.
Slovak, Eddie Slovak.
Yeah, Eddie Slovak for desertion. But I mean, there was a large prison in England called Shepton Mallet that housed at its height nearly 800 GI prisoners, and it was ran by U.S. military police from top to bottom,
Like in the movie.
like in the movie, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a little digging, and incarceration, as you said, by U.S. soldiers was unfortunately a little too common in England. But as far as death by hanging, the United States Army only executed 102 soldiers during World War II.
Yeah, it was. I think it was like at Shepton Mallet. I think they executed about a dozen there, and I mean, I read some of the crimes, and they're pretty heinous.
Oh yeah, it's rape and murder.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and among other things. And yeah, it was, as you said, there were a lot of convicted felons. I remember hearing people talk about, whether it was them or not, in oral histories, or they were talking about somebody, quote, they knew, unquote, that was given a choice by the judge. You either go to jail or you join the Army or the Marines. And they chose the service branches.
I had never heard. That's amazing. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
That still happens to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very, very, very true. Very true. Well, were convicts ever used for covert missions or operations?
I'm gonna say no.
Yeah.
I mean, you had plenty of gung-ho guys and gung-ho units that had clean criminal records that were willing to do the same types of missions. So there was no need to do something like that. No, and maybe the German armed forces or the Soviet armed forces, you had penal battalions where they would send those guys on suicide missions.
You had to clear minefields.
Yeah, clear minefields and things of that nature.
Seriously, yeah. Yeah. You did this. You did. Okay, go good. You're in the penal battalion. Go clear that minefield with a knife. Have fun.
Like a job for an intern.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think E.M. Nathanson, the guy who wrote the book on which the movie's based, said he had heard the story of a group of convicts who were sent behind enemy lines, and then came up with the idea for this book, and then later on was corrected and admitted, well, yep, I misunderstood the story. But it sure is a really cool element, because one of the neat things about the movie, I think, is that element of redemption. Here are guys who are dead enders. They got nowhere else to go, but here's one last chance to
die with your boots on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons it works so well.
Well,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, that was interesting you said that, because I read two different accounts of how this story came to be, and one account is from Russ Meyer, I guess, who when he was in the military or photographing during World War II, he thought he had heard of a unit of convicted felons and dropping into France right before D-Day, and the story was none of them survived, but the other story is it's based on that demo unit or demolition section from the 506th PIR, the Filthy 13. But yeah, those guys aren't convicted murderers or rapists. They're just guys who have company grade Article 15s for drinking too much. So,
And they were, correct me if I'm wrong, they were the Filthy 13, but just before that, before the 13th joined, they were the Dirty Dozen. Am I right?
oh, see, I don't know
That's what I heard.
Oh, that's what you heard?
Yeah, I read that. I actually read that this morning. That's exactly
They were
right.
the Dirty Dozen. Somebody joined in and went, oh, God, we got to think of a new name.
We got too many.
Yeah. One too many. Yeah, no, that's very true. They were actually called the Dirty Dozen, and when their lieutenant, who I don't remember his name, was joined when he was assigned to that unit, they changed their name to the Filthy 13, and that's exactly right. They were just a bunch of hard partying, kind of sort of semi-disrespectful badasses.
I think his name was Jake McNeese.
I think you're right.
Was the guy, and who?
Well, he was a NCO, but you were saying a lieutenant joined him?
And that's when they became 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, McNeese was like the
Yeah, he was a sergeant.
commanding officer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the little bit of research I did on this, I hope we're not jumping too far ahead on this, because I'm fascinated by this unit, by these guys. It seems like the whole premise, their whole there's a photo of them with mohawks.
Oh yeah.
And applying like face paint.
War paint, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a famous picture, right?
Yeah, I mean, what's really cool about that photo is the invasion stripes on that C-47 are still wet. You know, the white and black stripes that are painted on there, and they're actually dipping their fingers in that wet paint and marking their faces up like Indian war paint.
You can see the stripes on the C-47 and LMP at the museum. They painted them so that they could be recognized by their own people.
And did the Filthy 13, were they known for lack of hygiene, like the Dirty Dozen that we know of in the movie?
Yeah, I was reading about that.
There's kind of a myth, and I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's actually. I didn't read where it was confirmed, but apparently, from what I read, that they did refuse to bathe before the D-Day invasion. Now, how long, whether that was a day, a week, a month, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, supposedly that's how they got their initial name as the Dirty Dozen, because these guys, they were gross. They were filthy before they ever even went into combat, which makes you even 150 times filthier. And I think there is a sliver of truth to that. How true? How big is that sliver? I have no idea.
The Stinky doesn't have the same ring to it.
No.
Stinky 13.
No. Oh, geez. Anyway, how often did special covert ops such as this, or just covert ops, occur during the war?
Well, I mean, early on in the war, when things were desperate, that's all we could mount. So, especially, the formation of British commandos. I mean, these guys are trained in seamanship and sabotage, and they're hitting targets in Norway, occupied France. I mean, it's a pretty frequent occurrence.
Yeah, Dieppe, I think, is one of the
Well, it's like a recon and force, though.
Right.
I mean, that's huge. It's a
right,
division.
but it's not the Normandy invasion either.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, there were several covert ops, some pretty famous ones, and I think I read that the failure rate was about 60%, where these guys were sent in and they didn't come home, or at least not all of them, or the vast majority of them were captured or killed. But there were a couple that were pretty well documented that were successes. And as far as like execution style missions, like the Dirty Dozen is, they're coming in here to whack these guys in this chateau. There were some raids that were similar to that, not with American convicts who parachute in or anything like that, but there were guys who parachuted in. Think of Operation Anthropoid.
Yeah.
The mission to kill Heydrich.
That's exactly what that is.
Yeah, those were two Czech paratroopers who were dropped in to assassinate one guy. Now, granted, in the Dirty Dozen, they're assassinating, I don't know, it seems like 500 people inside that chateau basement. But
a ballroom full.
Yeah, there's a lot of them in there. There's a lot of them in there. But so, I mean, that kind of thing did occur, And then, the French resistance and the resistance in the Netherlands, and not just them, but I mean, like Greece and places like that, they were supplied via Allied airdrops, weapons, intel, whatever the medical supplies, whatever they needed to get the job done.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've read accounts where they dropped people in, specialized SOE operatives who were going in there with the French resistance or the Dutch or whoever they may be to zap somebody or blow up a bridge or, whatever. Yeah. Before, this is all before D-Day.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, the OSS, they developed those Jedburgh teams with the American officer and the French or British radio operator. It was a three-man team, and they would drop them in there, and that way Schaeff had direct control over the resistance movement itself, because they were liaisons between resistance cells, and they would, like you said, just order up demo equipment, whatever they needed to complete a mission, and then they could be updated in real time on mission objectives, things like that. So that's happening. I think that starts in March of '44. They start dropping those teams in.
Yeah, it's. I mean, obviously, we don't know about all the covert ops that are happening today, for good reason, but for obvious reasons, rather. But I mean, there were a lot in World War II. I think a lot more than most people seem to think, and the vast majority of them did occur in Europe. So how, we kind of talked about it a little bit. How do the Dirty Dozen compare to the Filthy 13? Larry, I know you were in the 101. The Filthy 13 were 101. So what?
I mean, they look like, they put. I mean, I guess the parachute school in the movie is run by, a full bird colonel from the 101st Airborne. I mean, so maybe there is a little more to, or more similarities than you'd think between the two. But I mean, other than that, they're both airborne qualified. That's about it, really. I mean, that demo outfit had objectives to blow up bridges across the Douve River in the Normandy operation. But
blow up or protect them?
I thought
I don't.
They're an engineer unit. They're going to blow
unit.
stuff up.
Which is cool.
Yeah. And then didn't they even I read Market Garden, they were involved, that unit.
Yeah, I saw that guy McNeese, he got tired of being in the line, I guess, and he went to Pathfinder, the Pathfinder course to try and, because he knew there's not going to be another airborne invasion. I'll just sit it out in England from here on out. But they get dropped in the Ardennes. Yeah, they get dropped in the Bulge to coordinate these resupply drops. And I think he ends up on varsity too.
He was an observer for varsity.
Yeah. 4 combat jumps, which is insane for anybody in the 101st. I mean, the standard guy is going to have 2, and that's if you made it, through D-Day and Market Garden.
So he wanted more.
No, he didn't. That was his logic behind going to Pathfinder school.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Talk about screwing the pooch on that one. Huh?
The unlucky 13.
Yeah. No, and those guys, they hung around for quite a while too. That unit. A few of them were killed in action in Normandy. A few of them were killed in action in Holland. Some of them were POWs, but that and they obviously had replacements coming in and out. But they hung around for quite a while. There were several of them who made all 4 of those jumps, or at least 3. They made the Normandy, the Market Garden, and then the Bulge jump. So it was they were pretty dang cool. They really were. Many of the stars in this movie, Lee Marvin, Telly Savalas, Charles Bronson, Ernest Borgnine, and there were others, I think, were World War II vets. Does that come across in the film? Mike, what do you think?
I don't really think so. I didn't, as I was watching it, I wasn't saying, oh, that's good right there. I was more taken by some of the performances. Like Donald Sutherland is so much fun to watch in this movie. He was kind of a nobody up until this, his previous roles were like, tall guy in hat and autograph-seeking father. Nobody knew who he was. He gets this role, but one of the things that strikes me is that it's so nuanced. You watch him, and his character is so fascinated with John Cassavetes' character, with Franco. He's always looking at him, always smiling, always trying to get his approval without even saying anything. This isn't on the script. This isn't on the page. This is Sutherland creating a character. So that struck me more than any military expertise on behalf of any of the vets in the film.
Yeah, I mean, the one that really sticks out to me is Lee Marvin. Savalas and Bronson. Bronson was a truck driver, and Borgnine was in the Navy and all that. But Lee Marvin was a combat veteran. He was 4th Marine Division, and he did Roy No. More and Saipan, and he was wounded. He was shot in the butt on Saipan, and so I mean he did see the elephant. He was there, and he was the real deal. But he looks awfully old. He's got some gray, some serious gray.
I think he was 42.
Was he?
I think so. Would that be because they changed his rank? I think.
Yeah, really. Yeah,
they made, but I had the same thought, and he looks like he was born in a Jeep. He just the way he carried himself, and just sort of the way he moved to me was completely authentic looking. You're right. He was a little aged, I guess. But would there have been someone of his rank?
A 42-year-old major in a combat unit? I'm not saying it was impossible, but very unlikely.
I don't know. It's so weird during World War II. It's an 8 million man army. In my own family, my great-uncle, I had a great-uncle, Benny. I never even knew him, but he got drafted when he was 42.
Wow.
And his youngest brother was 17, and they were the 2 brothers that they just knew, well, we don't have to worry about Benny or, Lois Jr. because they're too young and they're too old to get drafted, and those were the only two brothers who did get drafted. So I mean, it's hard to say with that kind of stuff, you know. I mean, it's 10% of our population in the military, which is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it would have been unlikely for a 42-year-old paratrooper major.
But maybe somebody in the OSS, you might have had old cats like that.
It's possible. It is very possible. But he did definitely Marvin definitely did carry himself like, I mean, he wasn't an officer. You know, when he was in the Corps, he was an enlistment. He was a PFC. I think he might have risen to corporal, maybe. I don't remember exactly. But, he was certainly no officer. But he clearly had spent enough time around some officers to understand how to act like one. And he did. You know, he had the stiff back and the walk and the talk and the stare. He didn't have the John Wayne stare. He had the United States Army officer stare.
But that's kind of Lee Marvin-y, though, isn't he? To
a point, sure.
He was being Lee Marvin. That's what I thought. Because he's great in everything he does, I think. But you know what you're going to get from him, and it's similar to Reisman in most of his roles.
Yeah, I mean, all I know is Lee Marvin wants to beat your brains out.
Right.
Every time. It's something to do with brains. I'm going to blow your brains out. I'm going to beat your brains out. You know?
Man who shot Liberty Valance. Beat the hell out of Jimmy Stewart with a whip the head.
It's also worth pointing out he had just come off of winning the Academy Award for Cat Ballou when they started filming this movie. He said Ernest Borgnine was recalling it in his autobiography, and it had been like 4 or 5 months earlier. And he was still celebrating when the movie started. That's what he kept saying. But that being said, he was probably feeling, cocksure. He was feeling good about himself. He was feeling confident. I'm sure he channeled some of that into that military bearing.
I love him. I think Major Reisman is one of the coolest characters in any war movie because he is just this badass, and he does not give a rat's patoot what anybody above or below him thinks of him, and I greatly admire that attitude. I love it. Absolutely love it. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say somebody's military experience that was kind of downplayed, and it was George Kennedy. I mean, he's playing a major. He was a major in the Army. I think he was.
I did not know that.
Yeah. But I mean, I think he got his start on the Phil Silvers show, I think. But like Sergeant Bilko or whatever. And but yeah, he's very mild-mannered.
Yes,
staff officer in this,
He's kind of a clown, too.
Yeah.
He's kind of a goof.
Comic relief. I thought Robert Ryan had the bearing of someone who had been in the military. I think he was just a drill instructor. I mean, not to denigrate that, but he was in the Marines, and he had previously served on Tender Comrade. So that was his previous service experience, which is a film we talked about on the podcast before. But he's sort of the bad guy in the film.
Well, we were talking about people who carried themselves in a military manner. What did you think about John Cassavetes?
I think he's brilliant. He carries himself like a convict, not as a person with military bearing. In fact, he was nominated for an Academy Award. He was the only actor in this film who was nominated for an Academy Award, but he lost out to George Kennedy, who was nominated not for this movie, but for, what was it? Cool Hand Luke. Cool Hand Luke.
Dragline.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that the two castmates were but I think Cassavetes is easily the standout performer because he is such a creep, such a scumbag. And then people always notice that role because it won the Academy, or it was earned an Academy Award nomination. Telly Savalas really kind of knocks it out of the park as Maggot.
He's a psychopath.
He is vile. Yeah. He really, normally he's a hero. He's the tough guy. He's
Big Joe.
Yeah, exactly. He's a Lee Marvin type. And in this one, I thought he did a tremendous job. I really did, being just disgusting.
Yeah, the racist Southern, religious fanatic who is a rapist and a murderer.
Right? Oh, that's what's really funny about this too. The whole mission goes south because of him, and the psychiatrist with the unit. He's like, let me at least weed Maggot out,
Right.
Like,
a few of the real nutcases like Maggot.
Yeah.
Jack Palance turned down that role because it was just too much. It was too disgusting. He didn't want to go that far.
Yeah, Maggot is, Maggot. Maggot is, he's a maggot. He is
aptly named.
There's many scenes where he just kind of stands there too.
I know, he's just creepy, man.
Mm-hmm.
When things are going on, he's just standing there watching it go down.
Or when he's up in the guard booth when they're having the party after training and they bring in the truck and the girls.
Bottomless pit of ice. I see you, Major Reisman. Yeah, he's like spits those words
That's
out
fantastic.
too. Yeah. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes open, maggot.
And he's really the one element that is the least cohesive in the unit. Yeah. So he's the last one who steps forward when we ain't shaving in cold water.
That's true, yeah.
You know? Yeah, he's just, I don't know why they brought him along.
Yeah, well, he and Franco, too. I feel like if you're going to put together a group of guys to, even if they're convicts, to execute a special mission like this, you got people like Jim Brown's character, who he was a noble guy. He was in jail because he killed a guy who was going to castrate him. Okay, so he's not a bad guy. The Clint Walker character, it was an accident. He hit a guy who was bullying somebody else, and he's just this big beefy dude. There are other characters. Charles Bronson's character killed a guy who was running off with the medical gear. Mm-hmm. So these guys, you can almost say, okay, they can be redeemed. But Franco, from the very beginning, he's such a malcontent, and then Maggot is just such a psychopath. I can't imagine any officer wanting to assign these two, because you know that there's the fatal flaw in the mission. It would be those two guys, and it turns out to be true, at least with where Maggot's concerned.
Yeah, Victor Franco did all right until the end. You don't know Victor Franco. How does this compare to Nathanson's novel of the same name? I have to admit, I'd never read the novel.
I've never read it either.
I intended to, but just ran out of time. My understanding is that a huge opening section of the novel is introducing and talking about each of the characters, and which translates in the movie really in an interesting way, where they couldn't do the full dozen, and so they decide to focus on the dirty half dozen, and so you get the like more in-depth character interviews and conversations with. Because the other 6, you get a couple of comedic moments and a line or two, but you really don't know the full 12 very well. My understanding is that the whole first half of the novel is meeting the characters, and it is still for sale. I mean, it's considered a companion to the film, but it's quite a bit different, as I understand it. And someday I'll read it.
Yeah, in the movie you only meet, aside, obviously Reisman, but you meet.
There's 7 of them I counted.
Waterslaw, you meet Victor Franco, you meet Maggot.
Pinkley, Posey, Jim Brown, Jefferson. And who Donald else? Sutherland's Pinkley.
Yeah, do we meet?
Very little of Pinkley, though, I think.
Well,
right?
but they got
Calls
that.
him a near idiot.
They have that right. There's that one scene where he impersonates a general.
Oh God!
And he knocks it. That role is what got him MASH, from what I understand. When Robert Altman saw the movie, he saw that and said, "There's my Hawkeye." And so that one scene in this movie, because he was going to be like the back 6, where you never hear from him, and then that one scene just catapulted him to stardom.
And he got that piece of the role because Clint Walker didn't like it.
Yeah, I've read that.
And he didn't want to do it. Clint Walker, by the way, no relation.
Glad you clarified that.
That's another thing. At the time this movie came out, these were all like tough dudes. I mean, here you got All-American running back in there. And then Clint Walker. Did you know he took a ski pole to the heart and survived?
What?
Oh, yeah.
He lived like 30 years after that. Yeah. He just recently died a year ago.
Yeah, not too long ago.
Wait. You got to explain. You got to tell this. First, how did he take a ski pole to the heart? And then second, how would you survive that?
First of all, while skiing.
It wasn't like some joust or anything?
Yeah. Right. But I think he just pulled it out and rubbed some dirt on it, I think. Jeez. It was literally something like that.
That's a tough dude.
Yeah,
that was a huge man.
Didn't it touch his heart? It pierced his heart.
I think he was dead on the table. And they saved him, and I don't know if he ever skied again, but I don't know if I'd go back to that. Well, but yeah, he was a big, tough guy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What was he? He was on TV. Cheyenne.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How he didn't play Superman at some point in his career.
Right.
I don't know.
I swear.
He just has that look.
I mean, he's got a chiseled jaw of solid marble. I mean, he's a big boy.
I don't like being pushed.
Stop pushing!
Good God. So, The Dirty Dozen is not a groundbreaking film from a technical standpoint, but it's widely respected and imitated. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out again when this movie came out. It came out in 1967, which is many people consider, I think, rightfully a high watermark in American cinema. That's the year that The Graduate came out. Bonnie and Clyde, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, In the Heat of the Night. You just have all these movies that changed the way movies are made and broke the rules. And there are continuity errors in the Dirty Dozen. There are obvious, inventions. There's some stretches in logic. There's some bad dialogue replacement. But it did change the way movies were made to a degree that its legacy is it's extensive. There are so many movies that were inspired by this movie. I think what it is it's good entertainment. It's a good story, but you can overlook. If you have a good story, it can smooth over other problems, technical issues, and I think that's what this movie does. It's a good story, well told, with a great cast who really embraced their parts.
What I thought was interesting about it was marketed from the beginning, and we still think of it as an action film. The actual action is like 110 minutes into it. I mean, the actual...
but it lasts for 45 minutes straight.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what Aldrich said when Lee Marvin was complaining. He goes, by the time they leave this movie, they'll have seen so many explosions, they'll have forgotten what happened the hour before that. And but it's like super patient telling its story and getting to the actual mission, and then bam, all of a sudden it's tomorrow night. We're jumping, after they do the war games thing, and then you hear the poem, the thing that they learn, the rhyming thing that they.
1, through the roadblock, we've just begun.
Right.
2, the guards are through.
Right. I think it's not in the league of the films that you mentioned that were in that year. Bonnie and Clyde was just right above it in the earnings. And that was a real departure for storytelling, where this, had a lot of old Hollywood feel to it. And I think the fact that there were World War II veterans in the cast probably had a lot of appeal for audiences, but it was a huge hit then. And I think it still is. I think it's one of those movies that you stop and watch when it's on, when you catch it on cable.
And it really lends itself well to that. And I think because of the structure, it's got these beats, these acts, where one, you meet the characters, and Lee Marvin's got to come on board, and he meets all the characters. Second, he's got to win the trust of the characters. Third, then he's got to make them a team, and they have the war games, and then the big mission. So, and they all kind of play out. It's a little episodic, but it's that kind of movie where if you're just walking through the room with your laundry or something, you can stop and fold your laundry until the next commercial, and you feel like you got a beginning, middle, and end just by watching that segment.
Yeah, it is one of the more entertaining World War II movies, or World War II themed movies, that I think we've covered so far in this podcast, in my opinion, for sure. Many filmmakers were influenced by the Dirty Dozen. Are there examples? Because this movie is you said it's an action movie, it's a war movie, but it's kind of like I think it's a special mission movie, And when we're talking about World War II movies, which we obviously do on this here podcast, there's movies that are serious. There's movies that are comedies, like Kelly's Heroes and Operation Petticoat and movies like that. And then there are movies that are kind of I'd almost call it an adventure movie. And this, I think, kind of lands in that pile. Are there any examples other than this, and I have a couple, that you either love or hate, or that you think maybe were modeled after this movie?
Kelly's Heroes, you mentioned, is, I think, the most obvious one. But also, what's the Wild Bunch? The Western, Sam Peckinpah.
Yeah, that's
Western,
a great movie.
Where it's a bunch of bad guys who have to come together, or a bunch of anti-heroes who have to come together. And it ends in a much similar way.
Oh, yeah.
With a bloodbath. Although, an interesting thing about The Dirty Dozen is it got a lot of criticism in its time for being so violent. I don't think, and you see a hanging, you see people getting shot, stabbed, blown up, caught on fire. I don't think you see any blood at any point in the movie.
Vladik has a little ketchup on his forehead when he gets hit by that sniper.
Oh, yeah. And he just grabs his face.
Yeah. I think that's about it, though.
Right. Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, there's a lot of violence in this movie at the end. There's a few in the beginning, like you said, but there's most of it's all in the end when they're waxing that chateau. But the movie that comes to mind when I think of this movie, Kelly's Heroes, obviously with Telly Savalas, there's the connection there. It's Where Eagles Dare. Mm-hmm. With Clint.
Because it's another special mission movie.
It is. Yeah, it's a special mission, covert ops behind enemy lines. They're dressed in German uniforms for crying out loud. And Clint kills more people in that movie, I think, than all of his movies combined. I think he actually, I think he did. And the violence in that movie is far more gratuitous than it is in this. And I don't believe Where Eagles Dare ever got any kind of criticism for that. You would know better than I, but Mike. But I don't think it did. And I love that movie personally.
When Where Eagles Dare was made in 1973-ish?
1969.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, so it's only 2 years after this.
Okay.
And Kelly's Heroes was made in 70. And so there's the three, and then there's Guns of Navarone, which I don't remember.
That's 63, I believe.
Is it that early?
That's early,
Guns of Navarone, that's the original Mission movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And I think everybody follows that pattern.
Yeah, you might be right. I thought, for whatever reason, Guns of Navarone was a little bit later than that, but irregardless, the one that comes to mind for me is Where Eagles Dare. It's very similar in the premise. Alistair MacLean wrote that book, I want to say, like a year before the movie was made. And maybe he was watching Dirty Dozen when he started the room and he got the idea. I don't know.
I don't know if it's completely off limits to mention, but Inglourious Basterds seems to be the theater scene and as over the top as a lot of that film was. But it was a very similar story in some ways. Not a large team of people, but for sure the theater scene and the wanton destruction of Nazis at the end there seemed to be a direct homage or theft.
Sure.
Yeah, there was an Italian film called Inglourious Basterds that came before Quentin Tarantino's, and that is said to be directly influenced by The Dirty Dozen. Mm-hmm. And I think Quentin Tarantino took a much looser inspiration from it and then just stole the title of Inglourious Basterds from the Italian movie.
That's good.
But if we're talking about movies that were inspired by this one, I think we'd be remiss if... Have any of you guys seen the sequels to The Dirty Dozen?
I have, yeah.
I saw the first sequel. That
it's ridiculous. It's supposed to be set like a few weeks after the first one or a few days after the first one, but it was made 20 years later.
Yeah.
And so you think Lee Marvin has a lot of gray hair in 1967. Look at it's he and Ernest Borgnine are both in there, and they both look 20 years older. And then it was made for TV for NBC, and they have a different mission, obviously, because pretty much everybody dies at the end of The Dirty Dozen. So they have to have a new Dirty Dozen, a new group of prisoners. But they just lift whole chunks of dialogue from The Dirty Dozen as they're setting up the story. I mean, verbatim, word for word. And then they even throw in a gold heist. They borrow back from Kelly's Heroes. And then in the second and third sequels, Lee Marvin had died. Even Ernest Borgnine described The Dirty Dozen, the next mission, was the second one.
That's the one I've seen.
Yeah, he described it as a bittersweet experience because he was really happy to go work with his old buddy Lee Marvin again. But it became quickly obvious that this was not a good movie. In Borgnine's words, he called it an uninspired clam bake, which I think is probably a good, concise way to describe it. But it was Lee Marvin's second to last movie. But they wanted to make another sequel. So they had to have another character, another Lee Marvin-type character to lead The Dirty Dozen. So they went back to the original film, and they picked one of the actors from the original film, Telly Savalas, who died at the end.
Yeah, Maggot, man.
Yeah, he didn't play Maggot. He played a more Lee Marvin-type role. And so he played the Lee Marvin type character in the second and third sequels, which are... If you've seen the first sequel, it's pretty much just as lousy. Maybe not as lousy, but close. And then they did a TV series, which I haven't seen. I don't know if
I didn't know that.
That was one of Fox's first TV shows,
Was
I
it?
think, when the network came online.
one season. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. You can find it online. If you with some creative Googling, you can find all 13 episodes of that show. But I didn't have the time to watch them or the inclination.
Apparently, you watched all the sequels, though, Mike.
I actually watched them before this. They become it's like watching a train wreck. It's you almost can't stop watching it because they just keep outdoing themselves in the ridiculousness. I can't believe they just did that, and then they do something else equally ridiculous.
So Telly Savalas is raised from the dead. He's not Maggot.
He's not Maggot. And
Is he Big Joe? Did they get him from Switzerland?
Right. He actually does a pretty good job because that's what Savalas does. The big tough guy playing Kojak, basically. He does a reason. He's probably. He's the best thing about those sequels, I guess. But that's a low bar. And Borgnine. Borgnine is in all of the Dirty Dozen movies. I think he's the only guy. Telly Savalas would have been in 3 of the 4, and Borgnine's in all 4 of them. playing the same character.
You could tell he enjoyed being in the first one. You know, he gets to do a spit take. He gets to drive around in a Jeep.
Right.
And he gets to, like, slowly realize that the caper is happening in the
Right.
war games. And you can just see he's enjoying himself doing that.
Yeah. And I mentioned his autobiography. He says as much. He says that was just a blast. That was one of his favorite movie-making experiences because he was friends with Aldrich. He was friends with Lee Marvin, so they had a good time over in England where they shot it all.
More so than McHale's Navy when he was filming the show.
He actually shot The Dirty Dozen while on hiatus from McHale's Navy.
McHale's Navy's awesome.
Yeah.
The show, not the movie. The movie sucks, but does the finale work for this movie?
The finale's weird. It strikes me as tonally not in keeping with the rest of the movie. It's jarring, but again, this was made in 1967, and there was another war going on at the time.
Nam.
Exactly. And so I think maybe Aldrich wanted to say a little something about violence in the military, and they're throwing gasoline and hand grenades down those air shafts to blow up the Germans while we were dropping napalm and in the Far East. So I think I think it works. I think the ending does work because it is so jarring. You're having fun. This is a good adventure, and then holy moly. Not Jefferson, oh my! In fact, there's a great scene in Sleepless in Seattle. Does anybody remember this scene?
Yeah.
Where is it? Rita Wilson is talking about the end to An Affair to Remember, and she's getting all teary as she describes it, and then Tom Hanks says, "The Dirty Dozen always makes me cry," and goes on and describes the ending to the Dirty Dozen, and it is affecting. It's a memorable movie because that's what you remember. Or at least that's what I remember is that ending. It gets your attention.
The pacing of the last 40 minutes felt awkward to me only because of where we are now and in the pacing of action in films today. It seems like it took so long to pour the gasoline and so long to animate or activate Jim Brown's character to get to that. It just there was plenty of action going on around that, but it created some tension. I don't know if it was intentional or just how they told stories then.
What I thought was cool was they gave you the roadmap. They told you what was going to happen through that poem that they recite, so they'll all remember where everybody's supposed to be. And so and so I thought it was fun to see, Posey guards points 5 and 7, and everybody else goes up the line going along with that poem. I thought that was a pretty cool structure where you knew where it was going and you could see it all develop.
You never see Posey die, though, do you?
Nope.
You see,
That's true.
You see, what's his name? That's with him.
Gilpin? Is he with Gilpin?
The little guy, number 12.
Trini Lopez?
No,
Oh, he got hung up in the tree.
He got hung up in the tree. Yeah.
yeah, number 12's with him with the 1919, and Posey's got the 42.
The little Donald
On the
Duck
bridge.
character.
Yeah, where Donald. Yeah,
Yeah.
where Donald Duck is. Yeah, I don't remember.
I read a blog post about that where I think someone asked Clint Walker about that, and it's like one of the unresolved elements in the film. You never do see what happens to him.
Yeah.
In there.
Maybe he got hit and they left him behind, and he got with the French that stayed in the chateau that they didn't. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's you mentioned the chateau. One of the things that astounds me is that was a set.
Right.
That was
They
a serious
built that.
set.
It was
And they couldn't blow it up.
720 yards long. That's 7 football fields. They took 4 months
Jeez.
to build that tremendous set. And, until I read that, I thought that was, a real building somewhere. That's a tremendous bit of movie making. The bridge that went over the river, that's all on a set. I thought that was an amazing bit of craftsmanship in the finale.
Yeah, and I mean that's not wood. You see the powder and everything when I don't know what they made the columns on the bridge out of when Lee Marvin takes that prime mover and runs over that I think it's a Kettenkrad on the bridge.
Just kind of pushes it off.
Yeah, and he just smashes that thing and it rolls over and it knocks a bunch of the columns off the bridge. You can see the powder or the dust or whatever it is coming from the concrete or whatever it is that they made those columns out of. And then when they set the chateau off, you can see some of the same stuff. It's not like in Kelly's Heroes when they blow up the barn.
Right.
It looks like a house of cards going down. Just down she goes. And this sucker, it goes up.
But I was reading they built that set a little too well because they were going to need like 70 tons of explosives, some crazy to blow this thing up. So they had to rebuild the front of the chateau with like cork and plastic.
Balsa wood
yeah,
and
something like that. So it would burn and blow up.
It goes up.
It's that front center. The front center.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can see it. You
Yeah.
can see, once
Yeah,
you know
it
that.
just falls.
Yeah.
Down she goes. But yeah, I mean, the finale, the end, you're right, Dave. It does kind of build up, and then when Maggot does his whole thing with the German woman in the room and, sets off the whole shooting works,
Yeah.
if you will. And then...
And that ooga horn that's going
God.
on. Ooga, ooga. That's like one of my favorite parts when Richard Jackal shoots that thing. Like, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously, that is one of the more annoying sounds on the planet. But I mean, when they get all these guys into that basement or wine cellar or whatever it is, I mean, that's just men and women, and they don't care. They're sent there to kill those people, and that's exactly what they do, and they don't care who's with them. And it's, talk about it being dark violence. That is certainly some dark violence, but I mean, they're there to do a job. And
We also get to see
they
Jim
did their
Brown
job.
show off his open field speed.
Yeah.
he could move. I don't know if he could move like that anymore, but he certainly could back then.
But like the whole premise of the movie, there was a war game that was held
Sure.
on the eve of D-Day
Right.
in the same place in Brittany. But we didn't need to drop a special team of assassins in because our air power just shot up a lot of these guys like Rommel.
including Rommel, yeah.
Lots of these guys, I mean, if you drove on the open road in the daylight, it was like a death warrant, just because of our air supremacy.
Well, Dave, I'll start with you. Did you like this movie, and would you recommend it?
I did. Of course, I saw it first years and years ago, but I enjoyed seeing it again. I would recommend it. I'd also recommend a quick YouTube search. There's about a 10-minute making of promotional piece that follows the cast into London on their day off.
Oh, they're very
Yeah,
mod
that's
in that
awesome.
video, aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's fabulous artifact from that period.
It's almost like Austin Powers movie.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. Carnaby Street and whatever. But I totally recommend this. And it is, of the World War II films that I've watched for the podcast and because of podcast recommendations, it's certainly probably the most entertaining and the broadest combination of humor and the seriousness of the story. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I agree totally. I think this is up there with Kelly's Heroes. It's in fact they're often, or they have been packaged together on a 2-disc set because they're kind of spiritual sequels, and it's pure entertainment. Don't go in expecting to learn much. You're not going to learn about the war and about the troop movements and that sort of deal. This is a 2.5-hour just free for all, and I think if you ask most people what their favorite World War II movies are, this is going to be on everybody's top 10 list, I think, just because it is so enjoyable. In fact, before I was asked to participate in this podcast, I watched the movie about a month ago. It was on AMC, and so I sat up late and watched it, even the commercials, which really made it long. And so when I rewatched it again this weekend to prepare for the podcast, I was only too happy to rewatch it. It's one you can watch over and over again.
Yeah.
About you, Larry?
It's one of those essential guy movies. This is right up there with Bullet and what's the other one? Cool Hand Luke. I mean, you gotta watch this if you're a guy. It's just too cool, And I would recommend it. I'd watch it every time I see it on TV. But very good.
Yeah, I love this movie. I agree, Mike. It does remind me of Kelly's Heroes. Kelly's Heroes, in my opinion, is it's funnier. It's got some better comedy to it for sure. But The Dirty Dozen is awesome, and it's one of those films that, like everybody here at the stable said, when it's on TV, I watch it. Every once in a blue moon, I'll pull it out of the cabinet and watch it again. It is great. I mean, there's really the only person in this movie. I even like Maggot. I mean, I'm not saying I'd want to, hang out with him and drink a beer with him, Certainly wouldn't want to eat with him or go to church with him.
Set
but
him
I
up
mean,
with your sister or something.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But I mean, as a character, he's an interesting dude.
He's very in Savalas is, like I said, his performance is so fun to watch.
Yeah, he's
a good
creepy as
performance.
hell. Yeah, he's just staring at things and just very, very odd. But it is a really, really cool movie, and it's one that I haven't shown my 10-year-old son yet, but that time is rapidly approaching because he
Maybe
has
12.
seen Kelly's Heroes.
What would this be? I guess this is like a PG-13 rating for this movie, right? If it had to go before the MPAA, just because of the implied
definitely.
violence.
Definitely, I'd say.
Yeah, because
But it wouldn't be an R.
No, there's no significant profanity in it. There's no sex in it. There's no
Things
there's
are alluded
implied
to,
sex,
yeah.
but there's no nudity or anything like that. So
They're just dancing.
yeah, bottomless pit of ice.
The you were saying it's Kelly's Heroes is a little funnier, but I would put that Pinkley's going to be a general scene up against anything in Kelly's Heroes, man. That is one of the funniest scenes, I think.
It is, but Kelly's Heroes has those lines. I mean,
Yeah,
this does too. This has those one-liners too, but Kelly's Heroes is full of them.
It's got Rickles, for goodness sake.
Right.
Yeah, right.
That's true.
I mean, I know for a fact that you and I, Larry, could sit at this table and recite Kelly's Heroes from the beginning to the end right
Maybe.
now. I think it's happened actually once or twice before in all the years that I've known you. But we'll sum it up. Dave, give me some final thoughts.
I don't want to end the podcast without recognizing that this is the film that ended Jim Brown's football career, which is remarkable. He's still number 11 all-time leading rusher. His yards per carry is still number 1. He had just an incredible football career, and the film ran long, the shoot ran long, and Art Modell wanted him to come back to Cleveland and started finding him $100 a day. And
That's cute.
He called a press conference, which they held on the set. He was in fatigues in front of a tank and retired from football.
Wow.
Instead of all of that, and he was 29 or 30. He still had plenty of years left. He wanted to do other things, and he's got like 60 IMDb film and television entries in addition to his activism and other things he did. So I guess it was a good call. But he had a remarkable football career in the years before the NFL was the national sport, playing in Cleveland. And I didn't want to get out without mentioning that because he's wonderful in this movie, I think, but he was an incredible pro football player.
Yeah, he's still a national hero in Cleveland, Ohio, for sure. Yeah, no doubt. What about you, Mike?
I love this movie. Watch this movie. I mean, even if you've seen it before, watch it, rewatch it.
Oh, yeah.
If you haven't seen it before, you've got it. Like Larry said, it's essential. You have to watch it.
I don't know too many people who have not seen this movie. I mean,
I don't know too many people who have seen it fewer than 5 times.
Very true. But you, Larry?
There's a lot of, everybody has an M3 grease gun in it, which is really neat, I think. And, this is just a side note. When I was in the Army in the early 90s, I was in Korea, and I was an infantryman, but we were doing an exercise with an armored unit, bunch of tankers. And I see these tankers, and they have those grease guns, from the Dirty Dozen, chow slung on their backs. And I'm like, man, wow, those are from the Dirty Dozen. The Army still got those machine guns from the Dirty Dozen. And, that M3 grease gun stayed in service for a very long time when it was designed to be a disposable weapon. So that's kind of cool.
That was a piece that Marvin had when he
Shot the rope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
with an extra cartridge.
Magazine.
Extra magazine taped to it.
Yeah. But yes, I'd recommend this movie without a doubt. Yes.
Well, as I generally do, I'll sum it up with a quote. And it goes like this. It says, which one of you guys wants to be a general? What kind of general, sir? Just a plain, ordinary, everyday, home-loving American general. I'd rather be a civilian, sir. With that, I want to thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, or one similar to them, tune in to our mini-episode next week. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on Stitcher and iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer, Tessa Jager, and Music Shed Studios here in New Orleans. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.